for agreeing to give us an interview. And I wanted to start asking, yesterday Ukrainian interim Prime Minister met with United States President Obama, and Prime Minister Yatsenyuk warned that Putin might have a scenario to attack even to Kiev. What do you think, how real this can be?
I think the first rule of the crisis management, and I think the region is in a deep crisis, is expect unexpected and be prepared for that, as we learned in the past. But within this rule, I think three things are extremely important to concentrate on. First, security concerns. We need a security stability, which means an immediate withdrawal of all Russian military forces and cancellation of illegal so-called referendum in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, which produces an immediate threat to the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Second is economic stability, and that has to be achieved, which is part of also negotiations in the United States, both in Washington and the headquarters of the IMF, a package, macro-financial assistance and bilateral assistance to Ukraine that could be provided by both the IMF, European Union, and on bilateral basis, as has been confirmed yesterday by President Obama. And the third priority is political stability, which can and should be achieved through elections. That's why political process next 2.5 months is extremely important. As far as the President Putin agenda is concerned, it's not yet clear how far he could go, but our understanding, as well as our partners, is that he could go as far as he will be allowed to go.
Everybody is talking and urging him in the West to withdraw from Crimea, but he's not withdrawing his forces, and on the contrary, the military forces are concentrated on the border of Ukraine, in the east, near the Kharkov region border.
This is the current situation, you're right. Instead of immediate withdrawal and bringing the forces back to the garrisons, the locations, including the Sevastopol base, there is a concentration of forces on the eastern border, which is an increasingly worrying development. But we also understand that Ukraine is not a NATO member, because if we are a NATO member, or even on our path to the membership action plan, within the membership action plan, then probably the reaction on the West, including NATO, would be more forceful within the instruments available. But we have to deal with this reality, and as far as the costs of this escalation, I think what is increasingly clear to Mr. Putin that there are costs. There are costs. The question now, to what extent this perception of the costs, some of this made already clear, some of them will become clear early next week, whether this cost would outweigh the benefits that President Putin may consider he could get through annexation of Crimea and possibly encroaching into the eastern and southern provinces of Ukraine. This is outrageous in itself, because it's not just violates Ukraine's constitution, but it also violates obligations according to the international treaties, including the Budapest Memorandum. And Russian Federation is one of the three countries that provided guarantees to Ukraine, together with United States and United Kingdom, when Ukraine gave up its third largest in the world nuclear arsenal back in 1994. Now Russia directly violates these security guarantees.
This is also a very bad sign for Iran, who's stopping its nuclear program and also going into the negotiations with the Western Union.
I think it's much deeper, because you're right, at first glance it produces an immediate threat to the non-proliferation regime, because Ukraine joined the NPT, and that was the part of the deal, so to speak. But it's not just the enemy of the peace in the world, like Iran or North Korea, at an issue. I would say that also the United States allies should be of concern, because, for example, Japan has security assurance from the United States as far as the Senkaku Islands are concerned. And there is the other hegemonic country in the Pacific that aspires to get this to claim that their territory. So what is at stake? Not just the future of the NPT as one of the keystone of the security stability regime after the Second World War, but also the whole system built on the leading role of the United States through the military alliances, and also the failure to assure not just the potential enemies, but the current allies, like Japan, as I mentioned, and a number of other countries, that these instruments that are available, they will be applied, and they will be applied in a consistent manner. And I would not like to sound like too alarmist, but I would be very much concerned that as far as Mr. Putin still cannot reconcile himself with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the end of the Soviet Empire, so that the Baltic countries probably also needs to be concerned that if this aggression will allow to go forward with the prize achieved, like the part of the territory of the second largest in Europe European state, which is Ukraine, then probably appetite may grow. So that's why it's in the interest not just Ukraine, and that's why it is not bilateral conflict. And Ukraine cannot deal objectively with the force that it faces now, the Russian Federation army, the Russian Federation resources, and other soft power resources like communication resources, media propaganda, which is currently in the full swing in Ukraine. But it's also an issue of concern of the region, Black Sea region, but also wider region, which is Central and Eastern Europe, is part of.
What would you expect from the West and especially from the European Union now? What reaction should they?
What is clear that those instruments applied, those signals sent, they didn't produce a tangible effect. Tangible effect in the sense of the clear signs of de-escalations. Instead of de-escalation, we see further escalations. With the upcoming milestone, the illegitimate referendum, so-called referendum, scheduled for Crimea, on Sunday, 16th of March. That's the first conclusion. So therefore the next question to ask, whether those intentions to apply the second wave of the instruments, which show the highest intensity as far as the economic sanctions are concerned, aimed basically to a large degree economic isolation of Russia, would produce a tangible effect. There's a question mark. Because it is true that Putin's thinking is very much 19th century thinking. But today's world is the 21st century world, when economic interdependence in the global world also could backfire to those who apply sanctions. And that is especially a question vital for Europe. Why the United States turned out a bilateral trade with Russia a little bit more than $40 billion US dollars. For Europe, it's almost 500 billion. So therefore, their costs paid needs to be paid by Europe, if Europe will apply. Therefore, we believe the balance should be found in the coming days between the intensity of the sanctions, which we believe should be of highest possible, and probably limited period of time that the sanctions are applied to send a signal and to produce a credible threat and risk assessment for the Russian Federation. And of course, third has to do with of course, we understand that in the current situation, military element, military to military conflict is a road to hell. But it doesn't mean that some elements of military element should not be considered. Like, for example, Ukraine has every year 3 military exercises together with the NATO member states on the territory of Ukraine, 2 of which one is Sea Breeze in the Black Sea, and the other is in the Odessa Oblast, usually conducted in late summer. So there is a possibility, because of this situation, and to show that the concern is a real one, not just serious on paper, to consider the Ukrainian government, as I understand, will be willing to move along this way, to bring the date of this exercise closer to the springtime. So then also to show that there is something that Russia should consider. And last but not least, we may face a quite a dramatic development if and when, and hopefully it will not happen, if the first victims of such conflict, which is currently bloodless, will happen. Then that would produce almost automatically the element of the guerrilla war, or the partisan war, when people will come and will fight for their territory, for their motherland, and there is a high mobilization in the society. Then, if that would happen, which I think we hardly Ukrainians could be blamed for, then of course we would see a bloodshed. Taking into account that Crimea is not just the place where Ukrainians and Russians are living, but also more than 300,000 Crimean Tatars who were deported by Stalin and came back to their land and have their right to this territory. Then, of course, it would not be able to contain this conflict just in Crimea. And we clearly see concerns of such countries like Turkey, for example, that are very much concerned with these developments.
So I wanted to ask you, what is the reaction of Turkey? Is Turkey initiating any process or trying to assure the Crimean Tatars of their safety and so on?
Yeah, of course, we welcome this engagement, because Turkey has a legitimate concern of the Crimean Tatars population in Crimea, which also, for your information, those Crimean Tatars who are part of the Ukrainian parliament, they belong to Batkivshina party, which is party of Yulia Tymoshenko, and Mustafa Dzhemilov, leader of Crimean Tatars, recently had a phone conversation with President Putin, which shocked everybody, which also send a clear signal to not just Crimean Tatars and to Ukrainians, but also to Turks. That's very much concerned on the future of this very sizable Crimean Tatars population. Turkey, not just a NATO member, which is in itself an important factor to deal with, but if we take as a precedent developments in 2008, war in South Caucasus, in Georgia. There is also something that Russia is very vulnerable, potentially, namely a passage of the oil tankers through the Bosporus Straits, and which Turkey is responsible for according to Montreal Convention. So, and the yearly income of Russia of this passage of oil tankers is in the range of $150 billion. So therefore, I think there is a huge price to pay, but of course, it should not bring in its turn to the huge disbalances in the prices, world market prices for oil. But therefore, what we are talking about still range of the instruments, which are economic by its essence, to be applied at high intensity, but for a very limited period of time, to show that there is a price to pay.
You mentioned that your colleague, member of parliament, who represents the Tatars and is like a real leader, political leader of the Tatars in Ukraine. Why was he shocked with the conversation with President Putin? What did Putin tell him?
Because what Mr. Putin told him, and he went to Moscow on the invitation of the leader of Tatarstan, the Russian, which is part of Russia, Mr. Shaimiev, so that he said that, on his opinion, Putin's opinion, the Ukraine gained its independence in a very questionable way, which means the question and the whole legitimacy of not just Ukraine, but all former member states of the Soviet Union, which is not just Ukraine. And I would like to remind that 3 Baltic member states, Baltic countries, including Lithuania, were also in the past part of the Soviet Union. Therefore, if this is true, and I don't have any reason not to believe Mr. Dzhemilov, then there is a clear political conclusion from the very famous expression of President Putin in the past, that the breakup of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. So therefore he didn't reconcile himself with that. And this is a very serious observation. And of course, what is the second part of this communication, that apparently Mr. Putin recognized that there are Russian troops in Crimea, and not just the Black Sea Fleet troops, but the troops from the Russian mainland, which is again part of the situation. As you know, a military monitoring mission from the OSCE was not allowed to go to monitor the situation in Crimea. Therefore, Ukrainian government suggested, and we hope that it will happen, that those, at least from our side, they will be able to monitor the situation on the eastern and the northern border of Ukraine, as far as Donetsk and Rostov region, or Kharkiv and Belgorod region from Russia is concerned. We have to have a credible, we very much hope that intensification of the diplomacy, including the tomorrow's meeting in London of Secretary Kerry and Minister Lavrov, would be one of those last efforts to reach a mutual understanding that further escalations is counterproductive, first of all for Russians, and secondly to agree on the steps, immediate steps that needs to be made to de-escalate. And the first immediate steps, as I mentioned, would be the bringing the Russian military forces to their permanent locations, and second, to delegitimize and cancel this so-called referendum.
Knowing Russia, Ukraine can expect all kinds of provocations inside Ukrainian territory, especially in the east and south of Ukraine, where there is a significant majority of Russian-speaking citizens. Do you have any information, Ukrainian government, Ukrainian parliament, Ukrainian institutions, of Russians, of the Russian government or Russian institutions trying to provoke certain parts of Ukraine or cause certain problems there?
Yeah, I myself from Donetsk. My hometown is Donetsk, which is the capital of Donbass, and a number of my relatives still living there. So I think one of the mistakes in calculation made by the Russian side, that the Russian troops will be greeted with flowers and enthusiasm in Crimea and in eastern Ukraine, that was wrong calculations. Even in Crimea, it's not the case. We know that there is no, not just majority, but no sizable minority in eastern Ukraine that would welcome the Russian occupation or cessation of the eastern part of Ukraine to Russia. This is the first very important observation on the grassroots level, the citizens. Second, the Ukrainian government already made some steps, including appointing with their consent as a governors of the number eastern Ukrainian provinces, most notably Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk, those industrialists, some of them called oligarchs, who are owners and by large enterprises. So which is also sends a signal of confidence to the local people that as far as their jobs, their social security issues will not be sacrificed for the sake of, some people consider that is a case of Western Ukrainians. This is part of the inclusiveness on the local and regional level, which is an important signal that has been sent. And of course, the third element of which, that's the Ukrainian government, central government, probably very soon, as soon as next week, will secure a very much needed loans and bilateral funds from IMF and European Union, United States and some other countries that would help also to remedy an immediate economic hardships, which is a result of the situation when the state coffers are empty because of the huge mega corruption by the previous government and the previous president.
And the last question, you mentioned political stability in Ukraine. Will you continue with the presidential elections?
This is something that is very important because on the one hand we're already in the presidential election cycle, which has been announced and started, launched in the 25th of February. That's why today's package to be discussed and hopefully voted in the Rada concerns some amendments and also the changes in the Central Election Commission, because this is an institutional aspect of the free and fair elections. Ukrainian government already issued an invitation for the OSCE and other international organizations to send observers, both long-term and short-term. But of course, it's very difficult to predict how the situation would go. What is needed, a renewed legitimacy of the presidency, the government, because the current situation when the Speaker of the Rada, at the same time, according to the Constitution, because President de facto abdicated and left the country, he is also an acting president. It's very important that it's limited in time, and that this renewed legitimacy would allow to deal with the Ukrainian central authorities as a fully legitimate authorities, long-term, that received a democratic mandate from the Ukrainian voters. That's why political stability, economic stability and security stability are intertwined. And whatever deterioration in one of these aspects or two would immediately have an impact to the third one. If the escalation as far as security is concerned will go, of course that would put at risk the date for the presidential elections, because it would be very difficult to exercise it. That's why the first and the most important immediate task is a security stability, which has to do with military de-escalation and cancellation of the referendum, of the so-called referendum, 16th of March.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.